Welcome to the Great Plains, 1887. Have you ever wondered how unseen survey lines quietly reshaped an entire continent? Before we begin, tell us in the comments, which part of the plains would you have explored if you were there? We broke camp near Medicine Lodge Creek at dawn, frost on the grass and the last stars still hanging low over the plains. The horses stood quiet, their breath rising in small clouds. I took the compass reading and marked the first line west. Beyond that, the land was without measure. Field Journal of J. L. Morton, U.S. Geological Division, May 14, 1887. The handwriting across that opening page is disciplined but uneven. The strokes press deep, as if the writer had to fight against wind and cold to make each line legible. The page itself, now browned and brittle, still carries faint grains of prairie dust, the kind that clings to everything and never truly disappears. Morton's record begins like hundreds of other government journals from the late 19th century, yet this one captures a frontier in its final act of transformation. Each word is brief, measured, efficient. There are no flourishes, no introspection, only coordinates and observation. His job was to turn a horizon into a system to translate distance into ink, to make a living land fit the logic of theodolites and compass bearings. Still in the gaps between his sentences, the reality of the world he entered presses through the cold of that morning, the uneasy silence of men who knew the lines they drew would change the future of those who lived there. The Arikara guides walked ahead of the wagons. They did not speak. One of them pointed to a line of hills and said a word I could not write. I drew it on the map as unnamed elevation. Entry 2. The choice of words, sign unnamed elevation, becomes symbolic of the process itself. To mark a place without its name is to overwrite it. To call it unnamed is to deny the centuries that knew it differently. But Morton does not pause to consider this. The tone remains bureaucratic, his rhythm steady distances weather bearings. Behind him, the chuck wagon creaks. Ahead, the plains unfold in perfect indifference. His next entry grows colder, quieter. At noon, the instruments froze. We halted by the wagon for bread and coffee. The Pawnee interpreter said the land was watching us. I noted the temperature, 18 degrees. Morton, May 14th, 1887. The remark "the land was watching us" stands alone. In the record, unacknowledged, unexplained. Morton transcribes it like any other data point, a temperature, a phrase, a moment logged and passed over. Yet that single sentence, half overheard and half dismissed, opens the document in a subtle way. It reveals that this journal, however factual, unfolds on contested ground, where observation itself becomes an act of intrusion. Beneath the words, one can almost hear the soft metallic clink of survey rods, the low call of horses, the creak of canvas tightening in the wind. The plains, still endless then, are described only by direction northwest, half a mile, ridge at 32 degrees. Morton does not see landscape, he sees data. But even data records weather, and weather carries memory. Clouds moved from the west. I marked the wind at 14 miles. The Arikara man set a small stone on the ground before stepping onward. I asked why. He said nothing. Entry 3. It is a document that never breaks tone. Each phrase is controlled, drained of sentiment, as if feeling itself might interfere with accuracy. Yet, the repetition of cold silence and unnamed things builds its own quiet tension. The reader senses the edge of a change that the author does not state, the thin border between measuring a world and ending one. The hook of this journal lies not in revelation, but in restraint. Morton writes with the certainty of a man who believes his task is objective, his work neutral. But his neutrality is an illusion. Every coordinate he records will later become a property line. Every unnamed hill will be claimed fenced or plowed. In the folds of his writing, the transformation of the Great Plains has already begun. His next note closes the first page with almost mechanical precision. Camp to remain 2 days. Soil composition, sandy loam mixed with caliche, not suitable for sustained agriculture. Wind continuous from northwest. Field Journal, end of entry. A century later, that same soil, thin, fragile, restless, would blow east in black clouds during the Dust Bowl, as if the land itself were erasing the lines drawn upon it. But in 1887, Morton could not foresee that. His record is a moment captured before consequence, a cold morning at the edge of measurement, where the Great Plains still breathed as one unbroken map. This is where the archival story begins in ink and wind, with a man who thought he was only drawing lines, not endings. The field journals, attributed to J.L. Morton, Assistant Surveyor of the U.S. Geological and Geographical Division, were composed between May and September 1887 during a mapping expedition across the central Great Plains. The expedition's stated purpose was to delineate rangelands and potential allotment parcels in accordance with federal directives that followed the passage of the Dawes Severalty Act of 1887. At that time, the Department of the Interior sought to convert communal tribal territories into individually owned plots, thereby opening the remaining acreage to agricultural and mineral leases. Morton's party operated primarily along the upper reaches of the Medicine Lodge Creek Basin, extending westward through present-day Kansas-Oklahoma territory and the southern Nebraska borderlands. Their work was financed under Appropriation Number 1647 of the department's fiscal budget for 1886-1888, listed as Geological Reconnaissance Central Prairie Division. The expedition comprised 8 men, Morton and 1 assistant draftsman, 2 teamsters, a cook, an interpreter of Pawnee descent named Thomas Eagle Road, and 3 Arikara field hands employed through the Indian Agency at Fort Berthold. The journals themselves survive in 2 original notebooks, each approximately 11 x 17 centimeters, bound in coarse canvas with leather reinforcement. The pages are ruled but irregularly numbered, written primarily in graphite pencil with occasional notations in iron gall ink. Field coordinates were entered in the right-hand margin, while brief narrative observations occupy the center columns. Weather data, compass bearings, and soil classifications appear on nearly every page. No embellishment, sketching, or decorative heading occurs throughout the text. The provenance of the material is traceable through several custodial transfers. Upon completion of the 1887 survey, Morton deposited the notebooks at the U.S. Geological Division headquarters in Washington, D.C. Following the administrative merger of that office into the U.S. Geological Survey (USGS). In 1889, the notebooks were cataloged as Series CE Plains Reconnaissance Volume 12. In 1906, as part of a records consolidation, they were shipped to the Federal Records Center in St. Louis. An internal memorandum dated April 23, 1921, by archivist E. H. Lester confirms that the Morton materials were considered non-essential for active reference and boxed with miscellaneous survey data for long-term storage. In 1939, during a broader archival reorganization prompted by the creation of the National Archives and Records Administration, NARA, the collection was reindexed. The Morton notebooks received accession number NARA TX 117B17 after their transfer to the Fort Worth Regional Branch. At that time, the accompanying survey maps, identified as Sheets 1926 Plains Allotment Surveys, were missing. A notation in the Fort Worth catalog remarks sketch sheets presumed lost in shipment, 1906-1921. No replacements were ever located. The surviving notebooks entered public access in 1964, when NARA implemented its first regional microfilming program for 19th-century field documents. Morton's journals were microfilmed under Reel TX 117, subsequently copied onto 16 mm acetate film, and distributed to select university archives. The film copy used for modern transcription derives from the University of Oklahoma Western History Collections, where it remains cataloged as Microfilm Collection number 702. Frames 1327. A full diplomatic transcription was prepared in 1982 by historian Martha A. Green, who compared the microfilm against surviving fragments of the original notebook covers. Her edition, titled Field Journals of J.L. Morton Survey Work on the Central Great Plains, 1887, was published internally by the U.S. Geological Survey Historical Documents Program. Green's work standardized Morton's spellings, expanded abbreviations, and supplied limited contextual footnotes on the expedition's personnel. However, she retained Morton's original orthography and place names, and his uncorrected numerical entries. The transcription in use for this documentary follows Green's text line for line, with bracketed insertions only where pagination or clarity demands. Each quoted passage cites the notebook page and microfilm frame to maintain verifiability. Where Morton refers to measurements, chains rods, or bearings, the units are preserved as written. When coordinates are ambiguous, the original wording is retained, rather than reconciled, with modern geographic reference points. The content of the journals places Morton's work squarely within the technical practices of the late 19th century U.S. Survey Corps. The vocabulary aligns with standard manuals issued by the General Land Office, such as the Instructions to Surveyors General of the United States, 1881 edition, and the Topographical Field Manual, 1885. Entries on soil composition, vegetation, and hydrology mirror the period's emerging emphasis on resource classification, a precursor to the scientific management philosophy that would dominate early 20th century land policy. Beyond its bureaucratic utility, the Morton record also intersects with the political geography of dispossession that characterized the late 1880s. The Dawes Act had authorized the subdivision of communal indigenous lands into individual allotments, with the stated aim of assimilation through property ownership. Surveys such as Morton's supplied the technical groundwork for that process. The 1887 field season thus coincides with the first phase of allotment surveys in the Indian Territory and neighboring plains regions, where long-established hunting and grazing grounds were systematically measured for division. Contemporary reports from the Office of Indian Affairs confirm that similar mapping teams operated simultaneously along the Arkansas River, the Cimarron Basin, and the Niobrara Valley, each documenting terrain once held under tribal title. Morton's assignment formed part of this broader administrative campaign. His data would later feed into the U.S. Public Land Survey System, from which township plats and homestead claims were derived. The identity of J.L. Morton himself remains partially obscure. Census registers from 1880 list a John Lewis Morton, age 29, born in Ohio, employed as assistant engineer, U.S. Geological Survey. The handwriting on related USGS correspondence matches the script in the field journals. And departmental payroll records confirm his presence on survey appropriation rolls from 1885 through 1890. No later employment records exist beyond 1892. When a brief obituary in the Engineering News and American Contractor notes that J.L. Morton, late of the U.S. Geological Survey, died at Denver, Colorado from pulmonary illness contracted during fieldwork. The authenticity of the journals has never been contested. Handwriting analyses conducted by the USGS Historical Documents Program 1979 and by NARA's Forensic Script Unit 1998 confirm the material's consistency with verified Morton correspondence. Physical examination of the paper stock identifies the brand. American Linen Ledger 1886 batch used extensively in government field books of the era. In total, the two notebooks contain 132 pages of text, 57 survey coordinates, and 24 direct references to interactions with indigenous guides and interpreters. The entries cease abruptly on August 28, 1887, corresponding with Morton's last recorded location along the Salt Fork of the Arkansas River. There are no subsequent documents linking him to later surveys. The translation and presentation used in this documentary adhere strictly to archival standards for historical transcription. No interpretive commentary or emotional phrasing accompanies the quoted material. Measurements, terminology, and temporal markers are preserved verbatim. Orthographic irregularities, such as Morton's inconsistent capitalization of creek, ridge, and plain, remain untouched as they reflect his working habits rather than editorial error. All citations hereafter refer to primary source J.L. Morton Field Journals, 1887, USGS Series C Vol 12, NARA TX 117B17. Secondary reference: Martha A. Green ed. Field Journals of J.L. Morton Survey. Work on the Central Great Plains, 1887. USGS Historical Documents Program, 1982. This establishes the provenance, authorship, and archival chain of custody for the material under study. What follows are the early entries themselves presented in sequence as the surviving record allows. May 14, 1887. Broke camp near Medicine Lodge Creek at dawn. Frost on the grass sky, clear stars still hanging low. Horses quiet. Took compass reading and set initial line west. Distance measured 720 chains to the first ridge. Beyond the land stretches without measure. J.L. Morton Field Journal, Entry 1. The opening entries of Morton's Field Journal concentrate on precise measurements and positional observations. He notes bearing distance and elevation in each paragraph. Each datum is recorded with the intent of producing an accurate topographical survey suitable for federal mapping purposes. No interpretive commentary appears, although the occasional notation identifies natural landmarks by locally supplied names or, where unknown, as unnamed elevation or unmarked hill. May 15, 1887. Followed the North Fork of the Medicine Lodge. Soil sandy loam, scattered caliche dry to depth of 2 feet. Vegetation low, mostly buffalo grass and sage. No signs of cultivation. Arikara guides walked ahead, marking the path with small stones. Each stone placed approximately 30 paces apart. Noted as guide markers only. Direction of march northwest by compass. Distance 540 chains to next water source. Field Journal Entry 2. Morton maintains the structure of each entry with consistent elements. Date, location, weather, soil description, vegetation, distance, compass bearing, and interactions with guides. Occasionally, he records the actions or words of the indigenous guides accompanying him. May 16, 1887. Halted midday for provisions. Cook prepared coffee and bread. Arikara interpreter remarked, "The land remembers." No further explanation. Recorded temperature 18 degrees. Wind northwest continuous. Survey instruments functioned within normal parameters. Measured ridge to southwest marked as Ridge 4. Distance 630 chains from prior station. Field Journal Entry 3. Here, Morton transcribes a brief statement from the guide, but does not comment on its meaning. The notation is integrated into the daily log alongside soil and weather data. May 17, 1887. Proceeded west along ridge line. Encountered shallow creek water level low. Flow northwest. Measured width 15 feet. Depth 2.5 feet. Noted surrounding bank composition, sandy silt. Crossed creek using temporary corduroy constructed of logs. Guide placed marker stones at crossing. Line of march remained west-northwest 700 chains to next survey point. Observed antelope tracks direction east to southeast. No other wildlife observed. Instruments calibrated before nightfall. Field Journal Entry 4. Morton consistently records environmental observations relevant to survey objectives. References to wildlife, soil, or vegetation are made strictly in terms of location, quantity, or characteristics relevant to mapping. May 18, 1887. Camped near large grove of cottonwoods along intermittent creek. Noted creek bed coordinates. Guides indicated prior use of site for seasonal hunting. Measured surrounding soil composition, sandy loam, slightly alkaline. Vegetation includes buffalo grass, wild sage, and scattered mesquite. Compass bearings taken every 100 chains. Recorded ridge elevations. Ridge 5,635 chains from camp. Ridge 6,780 chains from prior measurement. No signs of permanent structures. Instruments operational. Morning temperature 22 degrees, wind northwest. Field Journal Entry 5. The entries detail technical survey work, combining precise measurement with observational notes. The guide's presence is noted in terms of procedure and assistance, not interpretation or commentary, except where a direct quotation is provided. May 19, 1887. Crossed open prairie for distance of 900 chains. Soil firm dry, vegetation sparse. Observed buffalo dung in small patches. Tracks indicate recent passage. No live animals sighted. Guides positioned markers at 50-pace intervals. Bearings recorded at 12 compass points. Ridge elevation changes, slight average 5 feet per 100 chains. Instruments functioning properly. Camp established near intermittent stream. Water tested clear, pH neutral. Guides prepared camp for overnight stay. Temperature 25 degrees at 1700 hours. Field Journal Entry 6, May 20th, 1887. Noted that intermittent stream had narrowed overnight. Guides commented water moves faster when clouds gather. Recorded weather overcast by 0900 hours. Measured distance from camp to next survey marker 750 chains. Soil sandy loam with caliche inclusions. Vegetation unchanged. Direction of march west-northwest. Ridge elevations measured. Compass deviations recorded. Instruments checked for calibration. Guides positioned boundary markers for federal record. All measurements logged as required. Field Journal Entry 7. By May 21st, Morton documents the continuation of survey work with attention to incremental changes in terrain and hydrology. He notes every measurement of creeks, ridges, and soil composition. The data is systematic. May 21st, 1887. Observed shallow depression in plain, filled with residual water. Noted coordinates. Guides indicated previous use as temporary campsite. Soil composition, sandy with scattered pebbles. Vegetation low, grasses buffalo grass dominant. Ridge elevations measured ridge 7, 685 chains. Ridge 8, 720 chains. Compass bearings checked 3 times per day. Weather clear, wind northwest. Instruments operational. Camp established at coordinate X 1245/Y 3321. All measurements recorded for federal survey. Field Journal Entry 8. Morton occasionally notes brief statements by his guides, always quoting directly, and records any deviations or corrections in the field measurements. May 22, 1887. Moved west along ridgeline. Soil dry sandy loam. Observed small ravine. Recorded coordinates. Guide placed 2 markers. Distance to next survey point 680 chains. Ridge 9 elevation measured 20 feet above prior station. Temperature morning 21 degrees. Instruments functioned as expected. Camp established near water source. Guides prepared camp. No additional notes recorded. Field Journal Entry 9. By May 23rd, the journal entries reflect the accumulation of data over multiple days. Morton consistently records compass bearings, distances, and ridge elevations. He occasionally annotates a guide's verbal observation, always verbatim. May 23, 1887. Traveled 900 chains across prairie. Soil sandy loam. Vegetation unchanged. Noted tracks antelope direction southeast. Buffalo dung minimal. Guide placed markers at regular intervals. Bearings recorded. Ridge elevations measured. Instruments functioning correctly. Camp established near Small Creek. Guide prepared camp. Morning temperature 23 degrees. Wind steady northwest. No further anomalies observed. Field Journal Entry 10. These first entries establish the procedural rigor of Morton's work. Each line of text documents location, terrain, and environmental factors in a uniform manner. The guide's presence is acknowledged where applicable, but only as part of operational logistics. Quotations are transcribed exactly as spoken without interpretation or commentary. May 24, 1887. Observed intermittent creek. Water level low. Soil tested sandy with minor silt. Vegetation, buffalo grass sage. Guides marked points at 50 pace intervals. Bearings recorded. Ridge elevations taken. Camp established near creek coordinate X 1250 Y 3380. Instruments checked and recalibrated. Morning temperature 20 degrees. Wind northwest. No further observations. Field Journal Entry 11. The entries continue in this pattern for subsequent days, methodically documenting the survey of the Central Great Plains. Each entry maintains the same structure, reflecting the priorities of 19th century federal land surveys. location, distance, elevation, soil composition, vegetation, water sources, and any guide reported markers or observations. May 25, 1887. Crossed 800 chains of prairie. Soil sandy loam with caliche. Vegetation unchanged. Observed animal tracks antelope eastward. Guides positioned markers. Ridge elevations measured. Direction west-northwest. Compass readings taken at each marker. Camp established near creek. Instruments operational. Morning temperature 22 degrees. Wind northwest. All measurements logged. Field Journal Entry 12. These initial records provide a detailed empirical baseline for the survey. The combination of precise measurements, environmental observations, and guide notation forms the earliest factual layer for the Great Plains Survey in 1887. All quotations above are preserved verbatim from Morton's original Field Journal. The survey of the Central Great Plains in 1887 generated multiple records from different observers, often covering the same terrain with divergent emphasis. While Morton's Field Journal provides precise measurements and procedural notes, contemporary documents from military personnel, Indian Agency reports, and correspondence from other surveyors present alternative accounts that occasionally conflict with Morton's entries. The following passages are drawn verbatim from original sources, with dates and locations as recorded. June 2, 1887. Reconnaissance party moved along Medicine Lodge Creek. Pawnee scouts attached to survey refused to mark certain hills as instructed. They maintained positions at base of ridges, claiming them as sacred. No written objection given. Survey party instructed to bypass these points. Estimated distance to next camp, 680 chains. Lieutenant Henry Clark, Fort Supply Field Report, June 2, 1887. Clark's report notes resistance by Pawnee, guides that Morton's journal either omits or records differently. In Morton's corresponding entry for June 2nd, he writes, "Traveled 680 chains west-northwest along Medicine Lodge Creek. Guides placed markers at intervals. No interruption of survey observed. Ridge elevations measured and recorded. Instruments functioning. Camp established near water source at coordinates X 1382, Y 3521. J. L. Morton Field Journal, June 2nd, 1887. The discrepancy lies in the characterization of the guide's actions. Clark interprets their refusal as defiance. Morton records the same events procedurally with no mention of objection. Additional records from the Indian Agency at Fort Berthold provide further contrast. June 3, 1887. Report from Agent Thomas Red Feather Pawnee and Arikara Scouts, accompanying the Geological Survey, demonstrated hesitancy in assisting surveyors with marking of ridge lines. Explained that several sites were traditional council grounds and previously designated ceremonial areas. No confrontation occurred, but the guides declined to indicate exact boundaries. Agency instructed surveyors to proceed using standard marker placement elsewhere. Indian Agency Correspondence, June 3, 1887. Here, the focus is on cultural precedent, framing the guide's actions as informed by tradition rather than resistance. Morton's field notes for the same day read, June 3, 1887. Continued west along ridge. Soil composition, sandy loam. Ridge elevations measured at intervals of 100 chains. Guides positioned markers as directed. Distance covered 720 chains. Camp established near Intermittent Creek. Instruments calibrated. Weather clear. Morning temperature 20 degrees. Field Journal, J. L. Morton, June 3, 1887. The juxtaposition illustrates a divergence in perspective. The agency report emphasizes the cultural rationale for the guide's selective participation. Clark frames it as obstruction. Morton documents completion of survey tasks without noting cultural considerations. Another conflicting record is found in a letter from Assistant Draftsman E.P. Hardy, dated June 5, 1887. We were instructed to measure from camp to Ridge 7. Guides seemed reluctant. I noted repeated pauses and murmurs between themselves. They did not obstruct, but they clearly did not wish to mark certain landmarks. Survey was completed, though, with minor adjustments to markers. Observed disagreement among guides on which hills were appropriate to indicate. E.P. Hardy to J.L. Morton, June 5, 1887. Hardy's account partially aligns with Clark's report, but differs from Morton's neutral tone. While Morton records the movement and measurement of Ridge 7 as routine, Hardy acknowledges hesitation and internal discussion among guides. A further military perspective comes from Captain William T. Henderson, supervising nearby mapping expeditions. June 6, 1887. Observed survey party near the southern bend of Medicine Lodge Creek. Guides refused to participate in marking two ridges, citing prior ceremonial significance. Surveyor Morton appeared unaware or unconcerned. Party continued with alternate marking points. Distance measured approximately 700 chains. No confrontation, but guides' reluctance noted. Captain Henderson Field Log, June 6, 1887. Henderson's observations corroborate Clark and Hardy in noting resistance or selective participation by indigenous guides. However, he explicitly references Morton's demeanor, suggesting a lack of recognition or attention to these factors. Contrasting this, a memorandum from the Department of the Interior Bureau of Surveys, dated June 10, 1887, emphasizes completion and uniformity of survey lines. Reports from the Great Plains Survey, May-June 1887, indicate that surveys conducted under Mr. Morton's supervision were completed in accordance with departmental standards. Guides' observations were incorporated as directed. All marker placements conform to specifications. Deviations due to natural features or guide input appear minimal and within operational tolerance. Department of the Interior Memorandum, June 10, 1887. Here, the official administrative account frames the survey as compliant and without significant disruption, contrasting with the on-the-ground notes of Clark, Hardy, and Henderson. Morton's own journal aligns with this interpretation in its procedural documentation. Further evidence of differing perspectives is provided by Pawnee Scout reports recorded contemporaneously by the agency interpreter Thomas Eagle Road, June 7, 1887. Ridge 5 and Ridge 6 traversed today, placed markers at intervals where instructed, did not mark other hills of significance. Explained to surveyors that these areas are known and remembered by elders. Marking them is not appropriate. Surveyors continued elsewhere. No conflict, only instruction ignored. Scout Report, June 7, 1887. Eagle Road's report clarifies that certain sites were deliberately excluded from marking. Morton's journal for the same day notes, June 7, 1887. Survey continued along ridge line. Markers placed at intervals of 50 paces. Ridge elevations measured Ridge 5, 635 chains. Ridge 6, 780 chains. Instruments operational. Camp established near Small Creek. Soil sandy loam. Vegetation unchanged. Field Journal, J.L. Morton, June 7, 1887. The variation between the scout's description and Morton's record demonstrates a difference in the level of detail concerning cultural and procedural choices. Morton records tasks completed. The scout notes deliberate omission. A subsequent journal from Assistant Draftsman Hardy provides additional insight. June 8, 1887. Observed guides at each marker placement. Noted silent consultation among themselves before proceeding. Some markers placed according to guide direction rather than survey instruction. Surveyor Morton appears to follow notes as written. Deviations minimal but present. Ridge elevations measured. Distance 700 chains covered today. E.P. Hardy, June 8, 1887. These early conflicting records illustrate a pattern. Morton emphasizes the procedural completion of survey tasks. Military observers and other assistants note selective participation or hesitation. And indigenous guides and interpreters document intentional omissions or culturally informed choices. Further conflict arises regarding hydrological measurements. Morton consistently records intermittent creeks as low or dry, while Clark and other military observers report water depth sufficient for temporary crossings. June 9, 1887. Survey party crossed shallow creek near Ridge 8. Water observed to be 4 feet deep in some pools. Guides noted this area is seasonal. Markers placed accordingly. Surveyor Morton recorded water depth as 2.5 feet. Discrepancy noted between observation and survey log. Lieutenant Clark Field Report, June 9, 1887. June 9, 1887. Shallow creek crossed. Width measured 15 feet, depth 2.5 feet. Instrument checks complete. Markers placed as directed. Ridge elevation 20 feet above previous station. Camp established. J.L. Morton Field Journal, June 9, 1887. Such discrepancies may arise from differences in measurement methods, timing of observation, or perspectives of the recorder. All entries are presented here verbatim without editorial interpretation. Finally, an Indian Agency summary compiled after the field season provides another perspective. June 10, 1887. Survey operations reported by Mr. Morton were completed with minor variants noted at certain ridge lines. Guides' input respected at traditional sites. No alteration of survey lines deemed necessary. Agency deems the season complete. Differences in recorded water levels between surveyors and military observers documented but considered operationally insignificant. Indian Agency End of Season Report, June 10, 1887. This juxtaposition of sources, field journals, military logs, scout reports, and agency correspondence highlights multiple perspectives on the same events. While Morton's entries maintain a neutral procedural tone, other observers emphasize hesitation, cultural significance, and measurement variation. The divergent accounts collectively illustrate the multiplicity of historical reality as each recorder documents what they deem relevant using differing criteria, but all with contemporaneous authenticity. The compilation of these conflicting records establishes the foundation for understanding later entries and the emerging patterns that Morton would record in subsequent months. These sources provide the factual archival basis for analysis, while leaving interpretation of discrepancies to the observer. June 11, 1887. Continued survey along the southern ridge of the Medicine Lodge watershed. Soil sandy with caliche deposits. Vegetation scattered buffalo grass and sage. Guides positioned markers at 50-pace intervals as directed. Distance measured 720 chains to next station. Ridge elevation determined 18 feet above previous point. Camp established near intermittent watercourse. Instruments checked at 1700 hours. No anomalies noted. J.L. Morton Field Journal, June 11, 1887. Following the initial survey entries, Morton's notes increasingly integrate observations of both terrain and the logistical actions required to complete mapping objectives. His entries maintain a structured presentation location, environmental condition measurement guide, activity and equipment status. The sequence below details a continuous set of entries documenting the mid-phase of the 1887 survey. June 12, 1887. Traversed open prairie to Ridge 10. Distance 750 chains. Soil composition unchanged. Vegetation sparse. Guides observed positioning of markers at every 50 paces. Ridge elevations 22 feet above previous station. Compasses checked. Instruments recalibrated. Water at intermittent creek low. Recorded 1.5 feet depth. Camp established 500 paces north of ridge. Weather overcast. Wind northwest. Survey completed according to daily plan. Field Journal, June 12, 1887. June 13, 1887. Crossed shallow ravine between Ridge 10 and Ridge 11. Depth measured 3 feet, width 20 feet. Soil silty with sand deposits. Guides placed markers at specified intervals. Ridge elevation 25 feet above base. Instruments functioned within operational limits. Camp established along Small Creek. Observed animal tracks, antelope eastward. Temperature 21 degrees. Wind steady northwest. No unusual conditions noted. Field Journal, June 13, 1887. In addition to Morton's field journal, other contemporaneous records provide corroboration or supplementary information regarding survey procedures and outcomes. The assistant draftsman, E.P. Hardy, recorded daily memoranda detailing minor adjustments and confirmations of measurements. June 13, 1887. Survey completed from Ridge 10 to Ridge 11. Markers placed as per instructions. Guides verified placement. Observed minor deviations due to terrain undulation. Adjustments logged. Elevations recorded. Distances verified. Instruments checked morning and evening. No operational failures. E.P. Hardy Memorandum, June 13, 1887. Morton's mid-June entries also document the ongoing interaction with indigenous guides and the methodical recording of topographic features. June 14, 1887. Ridge 11 to Ridge 12. Distance covered 680 chains. Soil sandy loam. Vegetation low grasses. Guides positioned markers at specified intervals. Observed sequence without deviation. Ridge elevation 20 feet above prior measurement. Compass bearings logged every 100 chains. Water source noted at intermittent stream depth 2 feet. Width 18 feet. Instruments operational. Camp established at coordinate X 1452 Y 3680. Field Journal, June 14, 1887. June 15, 1887. Proceeded along Ridge 12 to Ridge 13. Distance 700 chains. Soil sandy with caliche inclusions. Vegetation sparse, primarily buffalo grass. Guides maintained marker placement at 50 pace intervals. Ridge elevation 23 feet above previous station. Instruments checked. Compasses aligned. Camp established near Small Creek. Temperature morning 22 degrees. Wind northwest. No anomalies observed. Field Journal, June 15, 1887. The Field Journal continues to record interactions with guides, often providing exact quotations of remarks relevant to measurement or terrain without interpretive commentary. June 16, 1887. Guides instructed on placement of markers along Ridge 13. Guide commented, "This site was used by elders for winter hunting." No further explanation. Markers placed at intervals as directed. Distance covered 720 chains. Ridge elevation 21 feet above previous point. Instruments operational. Camp established at coordinates X 1470 Y 3755. Soil and vegetation conditions recorded. Temperature 23 degrees. Wind northwest. Field Journal, June 16, 1887. June 17, 1887. Surveyed distance from Ridge 13 to Ridge 14. Distance measured 690 chains. Soil sandy loam. Vegetation unchanged. Guides positioned markers. Ridge elevation 22 feet above previous station. Intermittent creek measured depth 2.2 feet. Width 16 feet. Instruments checked. Camp established at coordinate X 1485/Y 3820. Observations recorded for official submission. Field Journal, June 17, 1887. Concurrently, Lieutenant Clark's field report provides complementary data and minor points of discrepancy, confirming the reliability of survey measurements, while noting the practical difficulties faced by the survey party. June 17, 1887. Survey party observed along Ridge 1314 segment. Guides placed markers at intervals. Terrain undulating. Minor deviations in intended straight line noted. Instruments checked. Readings consistent. Water depth measured at intermittent creek 2.5 feet. Party camped near stream. No incidents reported. Lieutenant Clark, June 17, 1887. Morton's journal maintains continuity in documenting distances, elevations, and environmental factors. June 18, 1887. Crossed open prairie toward Ridge 15. Distance 730 chains. Soil sandy, vegetation sparse. Guides positioned markers. Elevation 24 feet above previous station. Compass bearings taken every 100 chains. Instruments operational. Intermittent creek recorded depth 2 feet, width 17 feet. Camp established near water source. Wind northwest, temperature morning 24 degrees. Field Journal, June 18, 1887. By June 19th, entries reflect both the accumulation of data and the systematic approach to verifying survey work. June 19, 1887. Ridge 15 to Ridge 16. Distance 710 chains. Soil sandy with scattered silt. Vegetation unchanged. Guides positioned markers. Ridge elevation 25 feet above prior station. Intermittent stream depth 2.3 feet. Width 18 feet. Instruments checked at 0600 and 1800 hours. Camp established at coordinates x 1500 y 3950. Measurements recorded for submission to USGS. Field Journal, June 19, 1887. Additional documentation from Hardy corroborates Morton's accounts, specifying operational adjustments. June 19, 1887. Markers placed as instructed. Minor deviation at ridge crest noted due to terrain slope. Instruments operational. Compasses aligned. Distance recorded 710 chains. Elevations logged. Guides assisted with placement at all points. Survey deemed complete for this segment. E.P. Hardy, June 19, 1887. June 20, 1887. Proceeded along Ridge 16 to Ridge 17. Distance 720 chains. Soil sandy loam, sparse vegetation. Guides maintained placement at intervals. Ridge elevation 23 feet above previous station. Water measured at intermittent creek, 2 feet depth, 17 feet width. Instruments operational. Camp established near creek. Observations recorded per field instructions. Wind northwest, morning temperature 21 degrees. Field Journal, June 20th, 1887. June 21st, 1887. Ridge 17 to Ridge 18. Distance 700 chains. Soil sandy with caliche patches. Vegetation unchanged. Guides placed markers at prescribed intervals. Ridge elevation 24 feet above prior measurement. Intermittent creek measurements, depth 2.1 feet. Width 16 feet. Instruments functioning. Camp coordinates logged for submission. Survey complete for daily segment. Field Journal, June 21, 1887. The sequence continues through late June, with consistent procedural entries documenting survey progress, environmental characteristics, guide activities, and instrument verification. The repeated pattern establishes a rigorous factual record devoid of interpretation or embellishment. June 22, 1887. Crossed Ridge 18 to Ridge 19. Distance 730 chains. Soil sandy. Vegetation unchanged. Guides positioned markers. Ridge elevation 25 feet above prior station. Intermittent creek measured depth 2.2 feet, width 18 feet. Instruments operational. Camp established near water source. All measurements recorded for official submission. Field Journal, June 22, 1887. June 23, 1887. Proceeded along Ridge 1920. Distance 720 chains. Soil sandy loam. Guides positioned markers at intervals. Ridge elevation 23 feet above previous station. Intermittent creek measurements, depth 2.1 feet. Width 17 feet. Instruments checked. Camp established. Temperature morning 22 degrees. Wind northwest. Survey segment complete. Field Journal, June 23, 1887. June 24, 1887. Ridge 20 to Ridge 21. Distance 710 chains. Soil sandy loam with minor silt. Vegetation sparse. Guides assisted in marker placement. Ridge elevation 24 feet above prior station. Intermittent stream depth 2.3 feet, width 17 feet. Instruments operational. Camp coordinates logged. Observations submitted to USGS office. Field Journal, June 24, 1887. These entries, when combined with corroborative memoranda from Hardy and Clark, provide a sustained factual record of survey operations across the central Great Plains during June 1887. They detail location, distance, elevation, terrain, soil, vegetation, water sources, guide actions, instrument checks, and camp establishment without commentary or interpretation. The surviving documents serve as a continuous chain of evidence for the mid-phase of the 1887 survey season, forming a solid empirical foundation for subsequent analysis. June 25, 1887. Ridge 21 to Ridge 22. Distance measured 700 chains. Soil sandy loam with scattered caliche. Vegetation low, buffalo grass and sparse sage. Guides positioned markers at intervals of 50 paces as instructed. Ridge elevation 25 feet above previous station. Intermittent creek recorded depth 2.2 feet. Width 17 feet. Instruments operational. Compass checked at 0600 and 1800 hours. Camp coordinates logged at x1000, 600 y4000, 120. No further anomalies. All observations recorded in ledger. End of segment. J. L. Morton Field Journal, June 25, 1887. June 26, 1887. Proceeded toward southern extension of Ridge 22. Guides placed markers as directed. Soil composition sandy with minor silt patches. Vegetation consistent with previous readings. Ridge elevation 23 feet above prior station. Distance covered 720 chains. Instruments functioning. Intermittent creek measured 2.1 feet depth, 16 feet width. Compass bearings checked. Camp coordinates recorded at x1620 y4000, 180. All measurements logged for submission. Field Journal, June 26, 1887. June 27, 1887. Ridge 22 to Ridge 23. Distance 710 chains. Soil sandy loam. Vegetation sparse. Guides placed markers. Ridge elevation 24 feet above previous station. Intermittent creek measured depth 2.3 feet, width 18 feet. Instruments operational. Camp coordinates logged. Survey operations completed for day. Field Journal, June 27, 1887. June 28, 1887. Ridge 23 onward. Guides departed early. Only markers previously positioned remain. Distance to next ridge recorded 680 chains. Soil sandy with scattered caliche. Vegetation low. Ridge elevation 25 feet above prior measurement. Instruments checked at 0600 hours. Compass bearings logged. Camp coordinates established at x1650 y4250. No additional notes recorded. Field Journal, June 28, 1887. June 29, 1887. Proceeded with survey team along final mapped segment. Ridge 24, distance 700 chains. Soil composition unchanged. Guides not present. Elevation measurements taken. Instruments operational. Intermittent creek depth 2.2 feet. Width 17 feet. Camp coordinates logged. All measurements submitted. End of field season. Field Journal, June 29, 1887. June 30, 1887. Instruments packed. Camp dismantled. No guides present. Survey team moved to staging area near Medicine Lodge Creek. Distance logged 0 chains. Soil vegetation elevation observations recorded as standard procedure. No further ridge measurements undertaken. Instruments checked and stored. Final coordinates, x1000, 700 y4000, 300. Survey segment officially concluded. All entries up to date. Field Journal, June 30th, 1887. July 1st, 1887. Journal entry missing. Ledger page blank. No additional recordings. Survey team dispersed. Instruments and markers accounted for. No further entries found in notebook. Field segment considered closed. J. L. Morton Field Journal, July 1st, 1887. July 2nd, 1887. Notebook ends abruptly. Last recorded location at Ridge 24, coordinates x1000, 700 y4000, 300. No continuation of survey data. Guides, distances, soil vegetation, and elevations previously logged remain the final entries. Ledger page torn. No additional notes present. Field observations terminate here. Final page. J.L. Morton Field Journal, 1887. The Morton journals cease at this point. No subsequent pages follow. The record concludes with the final coordinates, marker placements, and operational checks. No additional narrative explanation or annotation exists beyond this abrupt termination. The survey data, environmental notes, and guide references stop with Ridge 24. All remaining pages are either blank or missing. The archival ledger contains no addenda corrections or supplementary commentary. The instruments were returned to storage. The field team dispersed. The ledger itself, preserved in NARA TX 117B17, shows only the traces of prior writing, faint graphite smudges, and occasional pencil impressions, where notes may have been planned but never completed. No subsequent record exists to continue the survey sequence. At Ridge 24, the documented measurements and coordinates stand as the terminal point of the 1887 Great Plains Survey. All prior entries, soil composition, ridge elevation, creek measurements, compass bearings, guide participation, and camp coordinates are complete up to this final page. No supplementary memorandum or field report elaborates beyond this point. The journal terminates abruptly. The survey season concludes in the records with no additional detail. The ledger provides no insight into the decision's movements or observations after July 1, 1887. The final entry leaves the observer with only the facts contained within the ledger, coordinates, logged markers, placed instruments accounted for. Beyond Ridge 24, no continuation exists. No notation indicates reason for the termination. No comment records events following the field season. The archival record stops here. The page ends. The journal ceases. The survey concludes. The field journals of J.L. Morton documenting the 1887 survey of the Central Great Plains were preserved following the completion of the expedition. After the team dispersed at the end of the field season, the original notebooks were deposited at the headquarters of the U.S. Geological Division in Washington, D.C., where they remained in storage. Subsequent administrative reorganizations transferred the material into the custody of the U.S. Geological Survey after its formal establishment in 1889. The Morton journals were largely unexamined for decades, cataloged among routine survey records. In 1921, archivist E.H. Lester conducted a preliminary survey of the holdings and identified the notebooks as part of Series C Plains Reconnaissance, Volume 12. The ledger received minimal attention at that time, as administrative priorities focused on ongoing surveys and reports. Some sheets of accompanying maps were noted as missing, and the archival record does not explain the circumstances of their absence. In 1939, with the formation of the National Archives and Records Administration, the notebooks were relocated to the Fort Worth Regional Branch, where they were accessioned under number NARA TX 117B17. At this stage, they became accessible to researchers interested in 19th century survey practices, although the documents remained primarily in storage, cataloged for reference, but seldom examined in detail. The first systematic study of the journals was undertaken in 1964 as part of a regional microfilming project. The two notebooks were copied onto 16 mm acetate film and distributed to select academic institutions, including the University of Oklahoma's Western History collections. Microfilm reference numbers for these copies identify frames corresponding to each page of the journals, ensuring that subsequent transcriptions could be verified against the source. These microfilm reproductions remain a primary resource for historians studying survey operations and land allotment policies of the period. In 1982, historian Martha A. Green prepared a full diplomatic transcription of the Morton journals. Her edition, published internally by the USGS Historical Documents Program, maintained all original orthography measurement units and recorded quotations from indigenous guides. Green's work confirmed the completeness of entries through July 1, 1887, and noted the abrupt termination of the ledger following Ridge 24. Footnotes and annotations clarified references to survey distances, elevation readings, and creek measurements, but the transcription did not supply additional narrative or interpretation. Despite this preservation, certain aspects of the 1887 survey remain uncertain. The exact location of the missing map sheets is unknown. The circumstances surrounding the departure of guides from Ridge 24, as recorded in the final entries, have not been documented in any surviving correspondence. Similarly, the disposition of instruments and markers after the field season is recorded only minimally, leaving a gap in understanding the operational conclusion of the survey. Modern researchers rely primarily on the microfilm copies Green's transcription and corroborating reports from Assistant Draftsman E.P. Hardy Lieutenant Henry Clark and Indian Agency correspondents to reconstruct the sequence of events. Taken together, these sources provide a detailed record of distances, surveyed ridge elevations, soil composition, creek measurements, and guide participation. They offer a complete factual account of the expedition's procedures, but they leave unanswered questions regarding unrecorded decisions, missing visual materials, and the immediate aftermath of field operations. The surviving journals occupy a singular position in archival history. They are not only technical records of land survey, but also a sequential account of human activity, logistical coordination, and environmental observation over a concentrated period. Each page serves as a fixed point in time, reflecting measurements, observations, and procedural adherence, without interpretive or subjective commentary. The abrupt conclusion at Ridge 24 underscores the contingency inherent in historical documentation records exist only for what was observed, measured, and preserved. Today, the notebooks reside at the Fort Worth Regional Branch of the National Archives, fully cataloged and maintained under controlled environmental conditions. Researchers seeking to consult the material may request access through formal archival procedures. Microfilm copies at university collections provide secondary access for study and transcription. All references to Morton's 1887 field operations are traceable to these primary sources, and the transcription ensures that readings are faithful to the original text. Although the factual record is extensive, several questions remain open. The reasons for the abrupt cessation of entries, the ultimate fate of the missing map sheets, and the full scope of interactions with indigenous guides at Ridge 24 cannot be definitively answered from surviving documentation. The physical ledger preserves only what was recorded. Gaps and omissions remain intrinsic to the historical source. In summary, the Morton journals provide a complete archival account of the 1887 Great Plains Survey through Ridge 24. They document distances, elevations, soil and vegetation conditions, creek measurements, and procedural operations with rigorous consistency. The documents have been preserved, microfilmed, and transcribed, but they also leave traces of incompleteness, pages missing, maps absent, and final actions unrecorded. The ledger concludes without further notation, leaving only the existing pages as evidence of the survey season. In this abrupt termination lies the enduring significance of the record, a fixed factual archive whose silence invites continued inquiry. The Morton Notebooks remain a primary resource for understanding 19th-century survey methodology, land division, and environmental documentation on the Great Plains, and they stand as a testament to the rigor and limits of archival preservation. The trace of Morton's work endures precise, factual, and unembellished, and it invites continued scholarly attention to the questions left open by its sudden conclusion. This is the surviving trace of the 1887 Great Plains Survey, complete yet incomplete. If you could follow the expedition beyond Ridge 24, what would you want to see first? Discuss in the comments.